Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. This is an incredibly special treat. My name is Anna Chang. I am here to welcome you to UCSF Division of Geriatrics Grand Rounds on behalf of Louise Walter. And I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Sharon Brangman. And I told her that this introduction is going to take half of her time because she's so amazing. So I'm starting early. Dr. Sharon Brangman is the founding and the current chair of the geriatric medicine and the distinguished service professor at SUNY Upstate Medical University in Syracuse, New York. Dr. Brangman received her undergraduate degree in biology from Syracuse University, her medical degree from SUNY Upstate, internal medicine residency and geriatric medicine fellowship training at Montefiore in the Bronx. Dr. Brangman is past president, past board chair of the American Geriatric Society, ADGAP. She has also been asked to advise the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the McKnight Brain Research Foundation, the Tideswell Emerging Leaders in Aging Program, and has been an expert panelist for the White House Conference on Aging. Dr. Brangman has been geriatric fellowship director, has created linkages to connect medical students to older patients, started SNAP to pull together regional leaders in geriatrics, started an ACE program, directs the Upstate Center of Excellence for Alzheimer's disease, not to mention founding one of the only departments of geriatric medicine in the country. Dr. Brangman today, not even close. Today directs the Upstate Medical University Equity Research Corps with the aims of addressing a systemic gap, the importance of the lack of diversity today among individuals who participate in clinical trials and research studies. And she's leading a movement with the vision of changing the entire medical research enterprise so that we can recruit and retain diverse populations by engaging members of the community in the design of studies. Dr. Brangman has received too many awards for me to list. There are the Chancellor's Award, the President's Award, multiple community service awards, the AGS Henderson Award, but I will have to say that my favorites are the Women Who Mean Business Award and the Legendary Women of Syracuse. In academic medicine, we would call Dr. Brangman this rare triple threat, quadruple threat, all the threats. And it doesn't mean anything except that she is just good at everything. That is all true. She is all the threats in her excellence in her professional life, and yet she is none of those threats as a person. She is an absolute living legend in our field, a brilliant pioneering physician, scientist, educator, clinician, a courageous, insightful leader. All that is true. And she's also an extremely generous mentor. She gives a lot to other people. She cares deeply about our field, especially the young, the old, and the marginalized. She is a fantastic mom. Her daughter, Dr. Jenna Lester, in the Department of Dermatology here, has her own TED Talk. And last month gave a distinguished physician lecture from this very podium to the entire class of first-year students. And Sharon is a down-to-earth, funny, fun, humble, thoughtful, and all-around incredibly wonderful person. You can see that her talk today is titled Achieving Diversity in Clinical Trials Through Community Engagement. Please join me in the warmest welcome for Dr. Sharon Brangman. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for that amazing, it's always awkward for me to listen to all that, but thank you very much. So I'm going to talk today about a project that I started with some colleagues at Columbia right before the pandemic. And this started back in 2018 when I was at a international meeting about the results of aducanumab. And I was just struck by this international study that had 19 Black people in it. But I will get to this in a minute. So I am on the Eastside Advisory Board, and I will tell you why I work with pharma in a minute. So what I hope that you get from today is an understanding of the importance of inclusive participation in aging research, identify the components of successful community engagement, and describe the function of a research accelerator and its role in increasing diversity in aging research. So the challenges is that the vast majority of clinical trials do not include older adults or non-white participants. More women are being recruited, but still the numbers are limited. So interpreting these results as they apply to diverse patient populations is quite a challenge. And you know that it's not good to guess or do gross generalizations. It's just not what we are trained to do. So one systemic review took a look at several clinical trials, and it showed that 39% excluded those over the age of 65. And trials often exclude people with multiple medical problems, various disabilities, cognitive impairment, limited life expectancy, which you can kind of understand because of dropout rates, and nursing home residents. So if you think a little bit about a patient you might have seen this week, they would not have been included in the trial. And as I mentioned, aducanumab, which is a monoclonal antibody to break up amyloid in the brain, and it is a part of a new class of drugs for treatment of Alzheimer's disease. It was an international trial, and it had no one over the age of 85. It had 19 Black people, 3% Latino, one person who was Native American, Native Hawaiian, and 9% Asian, mostly recruited from their arm in Japan. And this drug was approved. There was a whole lot about this drug. It's no longer on the market. But then we look at lecanemab, which has been approved and is available. This one did a little bit better in terms of recruiting women. The average age on this one is 71, which is still pretty young for geriatrics. And you can see that it had a large number of men, women, particularly white, smaller numbers again for Black, Asian, and Hispanic. So these are the two groups, the ones that got the placebo and the ones that were randomized to get lecanemab. And you can see the numbers are still really small. And again, this is a big trial. And then donanemab, which was also approved, it's by Lilly. This is another monoclonal antibody. It is once a month instead of every other week. But you can see that, again, the numbers are pretty poor. This one had a little bit of a higher age range of 74, but the numbers are pretty sparse. So why is this acceptable, and why does this keep happening? How did we get here? Well, I'm going to focus primarily on African Americans, but this is really true of just about any group in this country. We have a long history of including African Americans in research, but it was often exploitative. The results didn't improve health. It often caused real harm to participants, but researchers established their careers and made a lot of money. And I'll just go over a couple here. The father of modern dermatology is Dr. Albert Kligman. He is responsible for the way we take care of acne in this country right now. He was the co-inventor of Retin-A. He has many, many clinical regimens that were standard practice. He donated millions of dollars to Penn, and they had lots of rooms and lectures and other things named after him. But he conducted his research primarily on Black men in Holmesburg prison. And many were left with chronic diseases. He injected them with asbestos and dioxin and all sorts of things. Many died. Some of them are still trying to get some retribution from that. And Penn, a couple of years ago, realized that this wasn't great to have so many lectures and rooms named after him, and they started to change some of that, but a lot of people think it was a little bit too late. Do you know about the GFR and how that has been used to determine that Black people had higher levels of creatinine, so therefore the GFR was higher. And this was a study that was done on a very small group of African Americans who primarily were pretty sick. They had diabetes and hypertension, so they normally had bad kidney function. But this little study was then extrapolated to every Black person. For many, many years, it was determined that because the serum creatinine levels were high, that means that Black people had higher muscle mass and higher creatinine levels, so it overestimated kidney function, and therefore there was a delay in treatment for people who had kidney disease. They didn't get transplants, and they didn't get dialysis. And most major hospital systems have changed now, and they no longer use this, but there are still some that do. You recognize this as the oximeter that was really used a lot during the acute phase of the pandemic. Well, this was a device that was created in 1970s. It was calibrated, and when they knew with the initial calibration that it was more sensitive to people who had light skin. And if you remember when you were a resident, you were always told if you had a woman with nail polish to remove it before you did the oximeter. And that was why, because if you had a dark color, it would overestimate your oxygen levels. So the calibrations were all based on white participants, and it overestimated the O2 stat in people with darker skin. So what happened during the COVID epidemic was a lot of African Americans were told that their O2 level was okay and they could go home, and they died. So this is something that was known, but there just wasn't the impetus to make any changes, and it would have cost money. So what did that mean in terms of COVID and the death rates that we saw? So as you know, race is not a biological determinant of anything. You know, the few genes that change the shape of our eyes or the color of our skin does not change our physiologic makeup. However, race has been used to express many of the different differences we see in medicine. And I was talking with a physician earlier last week who was saying half the things we learn in medical school have been lies. We just don't know which half. And what we're really looking at are the social determinants of health. And social determinants of health apply to everyone. Right now, they mostly focus it on people who are non-white. And it's really just a nice way to say, how does racism impact your health and your interactions with the healthcare system? And I would argue that it's time to really eliminate race as a variable in our research, because it doesn't tell us anything. And if we look at Asians, for an example, as a category, Asians could include Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Filipino, Indian, or Japanese. So when you see a category that says Asian, what is it really telling us? And there's so much multiracial combinations that most people don't even know what box to check anymore. So what does it tell you when you see a category Asians on a lecanemab study? Or even if you see the category white, because white is also not a homogeneous group of people. But we're always comparing all of these results to white as the standard, and the important differences between all these groups get lost. So I really think that all the smart researchers need to get together and start thinking about another way to discuss outcomes in research. And do we need some coefficient for social determinants of health, which impact everyone? So I will talk a little bit about a rural program that I just started, but the rural patients that I have a lot in common with the urban patients I have, and they're mostly white. So what are the social determinants of their health? And they parallel a lot with some of my urban patients that we see. So I just want you to think of this, you know, race is probably not a good category anymore. And we need to start thinking of other ways of looking at differences between groups. Academic medical centers have a huge role in much of the clinical research that's going on. And they're often located in areas that are poor, urban. They often displaced a lot of residents as they expanded. They have two tiers of clinics. There's resident clinics and then faculty clinics. So there's that private patient, and then that's the group that are being used for learning for residents. And patients know the difference. And then the hospital staff is often not recruited from that immediate area. They often go out into the suburban areas to hire and staff the hospital. So this creates a difference in an academic health center between the surrounding neighborhood and what is actually happening in terms of healthcare inside that academic area. And there's a number of headlines that I just took from various newspapers that showed that many older adults, Black, Latino, and people who are low income feel like they were not getting good care when they went to an academic medical center. They felt that they were getting discriminated against. They feel like their problems are not being seriously considered. And so if they have that feeling about that healthcare center, will they sign up for a clinical trial? And if we are not providing good care across the board to our patients, should we be offering them participation in a clinical trial? And, you know, we hear a lot about the Tuskegee study as though that is the study that most people are thinking about when they're thinking about being abused essentially in clinical trials. But in our outreach work, we found that it was the care that they were getting day to day when they went to the hospital that had the bigger role. Most people were not thinking of Tuskegee. I took some pictures here. This is the back of my hospital at Upstate, and you can see the big bars and the locked gates. And that used to be a thoroughfare, but security decided that it shouldn't be anymore. So it's all barricaded. And if we look again, this is again the back of Upstate. You can see the service area, all the utilities and the trucks. And right across the street is a housing development. When I took these pictures, there were kids playing. This is actually one of the oldest projects in the United States. And it backs up right behind Upstate. And in fact, Upstate was built on an area in Syracuse where there were many middle-class Black families with homes. Under the guise of urban renewal, they came in and gave them very little money for their home and leveled all the homes and built Upstate. And then they carved out a little piece that left this housing project. So a lot of my patients who are in their 80s remember this. This happened in the 60s. And this kind of gives you an idea of how some of them feel about the hospitality of Upstate. And it's interesting because I'm now in a new ambulatory center that was built a couple of years ago. And when they were digging the foundation, they found bicycles and all sorts of like cookware and other things from those families that lived there that kind of fled and their houses got razed. So the International Conference for Humanization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceutical Companies for Human Use said that there's really no good reason to exclude older adults from clinical trials, not on the basis of advanced age alone or because of any concomitant illness or medication, unless there's a reason to believe that the concomitant illness or medication will endanger that patient or lead to confusion in interpreting the results of the study. So therefore, attempts should be made to include patients over 75 of age and those with multiple illnesses and treatment. So there is really no reason to exclude older adults, but they are because most of the clinical trials don't want to spend the money and the time that might be needed to broaden the age group. The NIH also came out in 1993 with a directive that women and members of minority groups should be included in research projects. Guidelines should be established to specify circumstances under which inclusion is inappropriate, and the manner in which trials are required to be designed and carried out should be specified along with guidelines for outreach programs. And this was in 1993. However, if we look at diversity across disease states for NIH funding categories, you can see that this is way below their requested goal. So if you look at aging in general, 9% participation of African Americans, 75% white, 2% Hispanic and Latino, and 95% Hispanic, not Hispanic or Latino. And it really looked across Alzheimer's disease, cancer, diabetes, the numbers are pretty low. And this is funding from the NIH. And then in April 2022, the FDA issued new guidelines to pharmaceutical companies to increase racial and ethnic diversity in clinical trials. And they said that if they want to get their drug approved, they have to submit a plan early in their clinical development process that looks at recruitment and retention. Now, you know, most clinical trials start years before they are actually, the planning starts years before they actually are started. So it's going to be interesting to see how Big Pharma is going to try to change their approach, because they weren't even thinking of this when they started most of their protocol. This has yet to be seen, but I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Certainly moving forward, they're going to have options. So current recruitment methods are really not effective. Most researchers drop in and drop out. They recruit who they want and then they leave. They really just want to check the box without really investing in the community or the patients that they're evaluating. And so we started these kind of concepts where you really should not just go into a neighborhood and take before you ask. And you should give before you take. So you shouldn't just drop in, take what you need and leave. And I've had many colleagues over the years ask me, can you help me get into a Black barbershop or a Black church? Because I need to recruit X number of Black participants for my study. And they have no indication that they care about anything else except getting those numbers. And patients or participants recognize this. When we went out and started our outreach, they said, we never even knew what they did with that information. They just left. We have no idea. They actually wanted to hear the results. If they participated, they wanted to know what happened. But after the researcher is done, they're writing their papers and they're gone. So when making a protocol, you have to think about the patients that you want to enroll. Do you have an understanding and knowledge of their community, what they value, what they feel is important? What do you think would be a good outcome from your study that they would value? You know, some of the monoclonal antibodies don't even have a clinical appreciation. There is no way for a patient to even know if they're getting any benefit, because it's too small to recognize clinically. So it's statistically important, but not clinically. So is that important for your potential patients to understand that what the effect of your study is going to have on them? What is their health literacy? You know, research is a pejorative word. People say, oh, they're going to treat me as like a guinea pig. When I go to the emergency department, they don't even want to hear what's wrong with me. So why should I participate in their study? What are the eligibility requirements? Do they have to get a certain score on a MOCA or a mini mental state exam, which we know inherently has some biases if your primary language isn't English or if you haven't completed at least 8th grade? So what screening tests are you using to determine eligibility? We would have a lot of patients who clinically we knew had mild cognitive impairment, but when they took the screening tests, they didn't do well on those tests and were not eligible. What are their understandings of clinical trials and research? How long is it going to last? Can they get to the research site even if they live across the street? Do they feel welcome to go, or can they get there? These are all things you have to consider when creating a protocol. One of the things with the dementia studies is that you have to have a study buddy, and the study visits can last a half day. So we would have patients who are still working, or they were watching grandchildren, or they had a job that didn't give them sick time or personal leave. So for them to participate in the study would mean a loss of income, or there wouldn't be anyone to watch the grandchildren when they came home from school. A lot of times you need internet access. or an iPad. Sometimes the iPad is provided by the study, but internet access isn't, and that can be pretty expensive. Not everybody can afford it. We found out during the pandemic when we switched to telehealth how many of our patients still had landlines. And unless they had an adult child or a grandchild handy, they probably didn't even have a smartphone. So you have to think about that. Transportation, is it easy to get to? Some of the studies for some of the clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease last a half a day. Can they get back and forth? And what other responsibilities do they have? So the way study trials are designed right now, they're really ideal for upper middle class, highly educated. Either they're retired or they have a job that allows them to have sick time. They have a car and they can come and spend a half day. So that would exclude a lot of people immediately. So when we were listening to the results of aducanumab, I was speaking with a colleague, Mary Sano from Columbia, and we started to say there has to be a better way to approach this. And it turned out there was a National Institute of Health RFP out to look at how to improve recruitment for diversity in aging. And we came up with this radar mnemonic, and we got it started right at the beginning of the pandemic. And it only lasted 2 years, which I think was not enough time to try to change problems that are decades, if not centuries old. But they had real clear deliverables. And at the end of the 2 years, they did not offer any extensions or renewals. So when the NIH funding was completed, I didn't want the project to die. The other thing that often happens is we go into communities under soft money. We get a lot of interest. We get everybody excited. The money is over, and then we leave, and we leave people high and dry. And I didn't want that to happen. So I tried to figure out ways to continue this funding, and we now call it our Equity Research Corps. It's part of our Department of Geriatrics, and it's really available to upstate researchers or those in the region. We worked with people from Syracuse University, Cornell, Stanford, other places, and with Zoom, we can do a lot of these meetings, which I'm going to talk about, by Zoom, so that you don't have to physically be there. What really helped me kind of extend this was a contract I got with Genentech, which I'm going to talk about. But Genentech was very interested in creating a research study to be more inclusive of African Americans, and that was with their monoclonal antibody gantenerumab. Unfortunately, that didn't have any efficacy, and they took it off the market. But we made big headway, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So the Equity Research Corps really is a method to create the capacity and infrastructure to ensure the recruitment and retention of diverse participants in cognitive research in aging. And it has two main components: the Community Research Liaison and the Research Accelerator. So the Community Research Liaison is a new position, and I really wanted it to be professional. I didn't want the person to really have a lot of degrees, and I didn't want them to know research. I wanted them to know communities and know how to do outreach to develop trust and community relationships. And I work for a state institution that has very strict guidelines for salaries and titles, and most of them require degrees. And I wanted this to be a professional position with a professional salary. So we went through a lot of applicants who did not have degrees, and it was clear that HR was not going to let me hire them at a professional salary. I happened to run into Kathy Royal, who we hired. She has a master's in criminal justice, but it worked. So we hired her. It's a totally new position. She's the only one at Upstate. She actually lives in the projects that I showed you. She knows the community, and it is a professional job. And when she originally got the job, people said, "You work with doctors at Upstate?" Because the majority of people work in environmental services or the cafeteria. So the fact that she works with doctors at Upstate gave immediate credibility. People were very respectful and impressed that she had this job. So as I say, it started right in the middle of the pandemic. So she started with activities that were outside, and she would call it coffee and a bench. And she would meet with small groups of people and just talk. Our goal was not to talk about research or sign people up for research, but just to talk about what their health issues were, to tell them about our clinical offices where you could get care, and really just to have conversation. So we were not out to recruit anyone for research at that point. It was all about relationship building. And then later on, we planned to talk about research. And so we gave talks. I talked about healthy aging. I talked about the services we offer in our geriatrics program. We had a request by somebody who wanted to know about writing wills and estate planning, and I got a lawyer to come talk to them. Somebody had a question about all the medicines they were taking, and we got our pharmacist to come talk about polypharmacy. So really the idea was to engage people and to meet them where they were and to listen. And then as we began to get referrals to our office and Kathy got established, we did start to talk about research and go to different tabling events. And Kathy realized people love little giveaways, little tchotchkes. Our biggest favor is a back scratcher that says geriatrics and research on it. But she knows all the little things that people love, and they come to the table and they take a little bag and load up. But they also get information about clinical care, research, other things. That's just part of it. It's not the only focus. And that's really what makes it different. And then this is just some of them. We also used what are called residential health advisors, who are people who live in different housing complexes. And they have already been working to increase the number of women getting mammograms and other things. So I gave them a little talk about what we do, and now they've added that. So these are some of our resident health advisors who go out and talk to people about anything about their health and aging. They refer them to our office for care, and some of them are members of our accelerator also. So as I said, our grant ended in 2022. In 2023, Kathy had 17 outreach activities. So far, from January to September, she's had 32. There's so many requests for more. They would love for me to come out every time. I can't always do that, but we do have other people on our team come out and give talks. Now we actually do more talks about research and research opportunities. So here's some of the referrals for clinical trials. In 2023, we were able to get 261 and 51 were enrolled. So far through May of this year, we've had 123 referred and 23 enrolled. So you can see this works. It just takes time and it takes a lot of effort. And these are things that in general, I don't think big pharmaceutical companies know how to do. We did this little program called Step Up with Upstate. We created our own research program. We did it at Dunbar Center, which is a center for all ages, but we focused on the senior program there and also the Southwest Community Center. And what we did is we gave participants little Fitbits to measure their steps. And we divided them into two groups. It was just soft research. One group we would call every week to remind them to walk, and the other group we didn't call. And we had them log in how many steps they did. And they loved it. They loved it. And at the end, we had a big party. We showed them they walked over 3 million steps. One guy said he was hooked and he lost 40 pounds and he is now stepping all the time. And they wanted to know if they could keep their Fitbit. And when we told them yes, they were super happy. We gave them all $50 to show that when you participate in a study, we respect your time. They had never been given any kind of recognition before. We made little certificates, and I started to realize how infrequently people get recognized. You know, we have a lot of diplomas and get awards and everything. These were everyday people. they were so happy to get a certificate and a gift card. So now they want to know when we're going to do it again. But basically, we wanted to give them an idea of what participating in a clinical trial might be like. And we may have to do this again just because there's been so much interest. The other piece of our program was the development of an accelerator. And the accelerator consists of everyday people in the community. We have community leaders, caregivers, we had pastors, we had just regular people, but we also picked some select researchers. And we had to be very careful who we picked because some researchers don't really have an appreciation for this kind of recruitment. They just want to see the numbers. And by doing this, we created an entity where researchers can come and present their protocol, and then the members of the accelerator review it and give them a written report on ways they might improve it. And in order for everyone to feel comfortable, we had a couple of meetings to just kind of bond the team. There's no titles, everybody is first name. Some people in the community were initially very intimidated to talk with doctors and to be near doctors and all of these people. We totally made it an equalizing environment so that everyone would feel comfortable. And it worked very, very well. Here's a couple of pictures of some of our, we call it CRAW, our Community Research Accelerator on Aging. And they were to a person so pleased to be invited. We give them an honorarium for every meeting they attend. Again, we're respecting their time and not taking it for granted. And then they submit their comments, and we collate it into a report and send the report around and ask them to add or edit it in any way. And then we give that to the researcher. And we have people who say, can I join your CRAW? This was one CRAW. We had a researcher who does diabetes research, and she had a flyer that was clearly written by all of her well-trained research team. It had 3-syllable technical words and all sorts of terms that nobody really understood. And after the accelerator looked at it, they changed it, and it was so much more approachable. And Kathy, the community research liaison, was able to help her recruit people for the diabetes study. So these are just some of the small pieces that researchers who are so used to talking to themselves, who are all trained in a certain way, do things in a uniform way, which is fine when we're all talking to each other, but does not translate out into the community. So this was a way to increase recruitment for a trial. So Kathy has been doing phenomenal work. She has grown professionally in the job. She is now recognized in the community, and people are calling up asking, can you come to my fill in the blank event and table and bring the back scratchers? She helped with certain trials to really improve their recruitment. We have expanded a little bit to other age groups. We recently did a study with a researcher at Syracuse University who has no clinical experience at all, who's an exercise physiologist. And he created a program for adolescents with diabetes, type 2 diabetes, that involved high intensity exercise and eating during certain times of the day. But he left off one important ingredient, and that was getting parents involved, because there isn't any adolescent who's going to be able to get to an exercise program or who goes to the grocery store and gets their food. And chances are, if he was overweight with type 2 diabetes, so are the parents. So this was a researcher who, again, was thinking of the output that they wanted, the data they wanted to get collected, but they had no idea how to make it fit for recruitment. So we were able to help. But this is just an example how you don't have to focus this on aging or Alzheimer's disease. It can really be a model for any type of clinical research. I just want you to see Farron Epps, who I met through Tideswell, and I know Anna knows her. She created this amazing program called Alter, where she goes into African-American churches and teaches the congregation on, on how to provide care for Alzheimer's disease and other things. It has become a phenomenal enterprise, and I introduced her to Kathy. And Kathy actually went to her conference. And Kathy had never really been out of the city of Syracuse. So the fact that she went to a conference was a huge professional preparation for her. So she met Fayron, and Fayron has come to Syracuse. Her program is totally different from ours, but Kathy connected her to a church, and Fayron, or I should say Dr. Epps, did her altar program. And in that church, now they have members of the congregation who look out for people who might have cognitive changes. And from that, we've gotten 2 referrals of people with early cognitive changes that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. We got them into the office, and now we're hopefully going to get them into a clinical trial. So this would have never happened without making this connection. So this is a way of potentiating resources. I wouldn't have known about it without Tideswell, right? And Fayron was more than happy to get involved. So this is the way you increase what we're doing. We should stop working in silos and figure out how to make our impact greater. So now you have people in the church who are so proud that they now have this body of knowledge and that they can apply it to their congregation. And now more churches want to sign up. So we have to call Dr. Epps and see if she wants to come back. But it's also increasing our relationship with more people in the community. So there's just a total win-win here. So markers of success. You know, you can't have a mission without money, right? So I'm working hard to make this financially sustainable. We're working to get our community research liaison and our accelerator written into grants so that it is a part of the budget and it's part of the recruitment and retention program. And then we want to make sure that researchers are using our accelerator when they're developing their protocols. And so far we have relationships where that's happening. And this can really be a model across ages and disease groups. There's really no reason why this can't happen in pediatrics or happen with heart disease or any other disease. I would like to expand this into other groups of people, Spanish speaking, New Americans, Native Americans. We have the Onondaga Nation in Syracuse, upstate New York, that I have some preliminary contact with. Spanish speaking is interesting though, because it's not just translating the flyers and the research materials. You also have to have raters and testers in your trial, in your clinical trial that speak Spanish, because you can't just simply translate these exams into another language and test the same thing. The other problem is that we know that there's bias in a lot of these screening tools. And so when we refer people and then they're not eligible, the patient is very disappointed, but we're also missing the opportunity to enroll people because we're using tools that are not culturally competent. And so you can see why this is part of a bigger problem that has to be addressed on a system-wide issue. This is an article that I wrote with a team from Genentech. And as I mentioned, they wanted to do an arm of their gantenerumab study focused on improving recruitment with African Americans. And we talked about all different ways of approach, from the study visit, the length of the visit. We were working on changing the cutoffs for scoring on the MOCA and the mini mental state examination to make sure that we weren't excluding people who were really eligible. And this really took off. I found out so many other things in working with Genentech. For example, in Hawaii, it's really hard to get MRIs. So it's very hard to recruit Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders because they don't have MRIs or amyloid PET scans. They would have to come to Seattle or San Francisco or LA. So Genentech was actually going to work that into their protocol, because that was one of the reasons why there were such low numbers. So if you're a drug company, you should be working to solve these problems instead of ignoring them and just continuing on with your trial. this was something that Genentech is going to use throughout their company, and not just with their Alzheimer's line of treatment. So they recognize that this is a problem. They also do international trials, and so somebody in just name the country would have a different perspective than somebody from the United States. And so they're starting to realize the work that they have to do in order to recruit across the world in a way that makes sense. And this came about only because I know Alexandra Wise Brown. So if I didn't know her and we couldn't make this connection, I'm not sure it would otherwise happen. This is another important point. It's always like one person, two people trying to solve these huge problems that really require systemic buy-in. So some of the other challenges are the handoff to the researchers. You know, we spend all this time recruiting, and then the researchers don't call the patient, or they don't treat them appropriately. They still see them as a number. And so we have to work with researchers to say, we just invested a lot of time recruiting this person, and you're treating them like a number just to satisfy your need. There's a tension between relationship development and recruitment. Every study wants this immediately, and it takes a long time to establish these relationships. This has been going on now for about 4 years, and it takes a long time. Everybody would like this to be solved right away. This is a long-term commitment in time and finances. And then the other problem that we had was that most of the Alzheimer's trials that we do at our site require someone to have MCI or early Alzheimer's disease. And so many of the patients we were recruiting from the community had moderate. So we had to move it up to figure out another way of doing outreach so that we could get people earlier. And that's kind of where that ALTER program with Dr. Epps came in, because that's a way of identifying people earlier on. And then the most important thing is that we were trying to get people care. So we have them come into our office where they get to know us and our team. They build that relationship. And if they do have dementia, then they're often more open to hearing about trials. If they don't have dementia, we still give them good care. They get a great geriatric assessment and we follow them. So the next steps is to continue to work on the culture change in research administration. In my own institution, there are still researchers that just want to sit in a room, come up with a protocol, and then go and recruit in traditional ways. So this really has to be incorporated into the research infrastructure during those initial planning stages. I would like to engage researchers across specialties and look at expanding this model across ages and disease states. And then, of course, getting community research liaisons from other participant groups. This all takes money, and so we're just trying to keep things going until we can get to that next level of expansion. I'm doing ongoing work with different pharma companies. They're all very interested in it, and I'm trying to get them past that performative stage to an actual implementation stage. So this is considerations that are needed for trials, not just in the United States, but across the world. And it really requires some knowledge of the culture and some ability to function in a competent way. And that means a lot of training for trial staff. I think they also need to look at the people they hire to be raters and testers. They have to get trained. I think that they often require degrees that aren't really necessary. If you have somebody who's smart and energetic and educable, they can go through the training and they can be a tester or a rater. You really don't need a master's or something just to say you are eligible. I think it's a false requirement. And I did mention that to some farms and they're listening, but who knows? So summarize here, these are complex issues that require a focused solution. Performative solutions do not work. I am really tired of hearing, oh, I'm so glad you're doing this work. But then they don't take that next step to try to make changes in their own research. I had a conversation with a researcher just last week who said, "Oh, I'm just so glad you're doing this work," but she wants me to help her with recruitment, but she does not want to do the work that's needed. We really need new approaches. We need to think about that variable of race and how unimportant it probably is in this work, but that's going to take a lot of changes of mindset. I think that big pharma and researchers know these are issues, but don't know how to start. It's a very big project and it takes time and they want instant results. But I really think that community-based research is a viable option. It's one option, but it's a viable one. And I think it's very important that we have relationships with the communities that we serve. Questions or comments? Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you so much. This is so lovely. Thank you.
You should check that in.
Check that in.
Yeah, you should check it in.
Oh yeah, I don't check bags anymore. I've learned that one. I learned that one the hard way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon. That was terrific. Okay, I'll ask the annoying, tough question. You mentioned at the beginning you were going to say something about your Eastside disclosure and thoughts about working with.
So yeah, it's very hard because we've always had that line in academia about working with pharma. But I'm often the only voice around the table, and if we don't have those conversations, they will never change. And that's how Genentech changed, and we made some progress. We wrote an article that others will look at, but I'm often that irritating voice, with Eastside and others, because I'm telling them this is ridiculous that you want me to use a drug that I don't know what it will do for my 80-something-year-old patient. I don't know what it will do for my patients with different chronic illnesses and other problems. And they say, well, we want you to keep raising these issues, keep speaking up. And so I try, but it is a heavy lift because their goal is totally different. Their goal is to get a return on investment for their investors. The amyloid theory has been going on for 30 years, and it's been going on at the detriment of other possible theories for Alzheimer's disease. And the Alzheimer's Association and so many groups are so gung-ho, it has created a bit of tension with clinicians and with our patients. And so when my older Black patient comes and asks me, should I try this? I tell them the truth. We don't know. We don't know what it would mean. You're 82. You're older than the age group that's recommended. And I can talk you through all the issues, but you will be providing data that we will then use to make determinations for people moving forward. Most of these studies were 18 months long, and we don't know 24, 36 months out what's up or what could be a possible issue. So yes, it is a tension, and I know that their goal is to get as many prescribers and patients as possible. And my goal is to make sure this drug makes sense for my patients. So that's the tension.
Hi, thank you so much. I was curious about your advice for when people are wanting to do community-based participatory research, when they design the studies to recruit these populations that have been historically excluded, but they're either on career development awards and so have very limited funding, or they just didn't include all the things they've discovered once they've gotten into the field that they actually need money to support and enable. What do you recommend people do in those circumstances? You don't want to be causing harm by doing things badly or inadequately, but are there a couple things that are still worth doing or prioritizing amid constrained budgets?
Well, it's always about the money. So I don't know the answer because, and it's also about time. And if somebody is in a career development ward, that's a very short time frame. I'm not sure how successful they're going to be, and you're going to just perpetuate the same problem. So what we need to do is mentor people before they write the grant, so that they are writing grants that make sense and maybe can get carried out. Now, I know there's not unlimited budgets, but maybe you can use your budget more wisely for things that might matter more. And then I would want to make sure that they don't just hit and run. That especially if it's soft money and it's career development, and then you're off writing papers, you forgot to close the loop with the people that were part of your study. So this requires us as mentors to help make sure that studies are being developed that are not exploiting.
Thank you so much. There's a question from the Zoom. This is from Matar Basnet. Said, thank you so much for this insightful talk. Before CRL, all of the 11 referral non-African Americans, and after CRL, all 35 patient referred after were African American. Is that representative of the community from where the participants were recruited? So does that not create discrimination against for people from other origins?
So that study was done in Ithaca, New York, which has a very small African American population. So they asked Kathy, my community research liaison, to work from Syracuse to recruit people. We came up with a plan to get them down to Ithaca and all of that. So that was why. It was not discriminatory. They were working with what they had. They started to realize that their study was not going to be representative of anybody. So that's, they looked at the numbers very carefully.
I think I was really moved by the experience of Kathy. I'm curious, like, what her experience has been doing all this really valuable work.
So it's been interesting working with Kathy because her previous jobs, she was just used to being told what to do without giving any input. And I would debrief with her after she did an outreach and ask her what she thought went well and what we should do next. And she would say, it's up to you, Doc, it's up to you. And I say, no, you were there. I want to hear your input. I want to see how we fine tune this. So a lot of it was helping Kathy take ownership of what she was doing and realize that her input was very important for making sure this program grew and improved. She also had never really worked in a professional setting like this. And so it was learning emails and purchase requisitions and just the whole process of being in an academic bureaucracy. So that was something else that was new. And then being in a place where her opinion was valued has really changed the way she operates. And then I helped her understand the TSA process and flying and all of that. So it has been a very interesting process. Now she's asking, are there any more conferences? And then she asked me the other day, maybe I should work on my PhD. All of that is great because she's now thinking about what could be next. This is somebody who probably would not have developed and evolved in this way.
Thank you, Sharon. That was great. I don't know if you guys talked about this when I stepped away, but you talked about getting rid of race as a category in the research studies. But how will we study racial disparities without gathering that information?
Well, if there is, that's a very good point. But racial disparities would be a special focus of a study, then race might be important. But in a study where you're looking to see the efficacy of a treatment of a certain drug, if we're talking about the social determinants of health, maybe we need some coefficients that would identify that. I mean, we already know that the disparities are there. I think we're at the stage now where we need to solve these disparities. I don't know if we need any more needs assessment defining the issue. So how do we fix it? If we keep having these general categories of white, Hispanic, and Black, what do they mean, especially when we have such a multiracial society now? People don't even know what box to check.
You're kind of alluding to class may make more of a difference than race.
So, for example, the studies that said Black people had lower lung capacity, that was done in a study. Did you hear about that? So this is the latest change that's been happening because all of the normative values for PFTs have been looked at. And the studies that were done that showed that Black people had lower lung volumes were done in groups of people who live near railroad tracks, places with smokestacks and a lot of air pollution. So what they were really studying was environmental causes of reduced lung capacity, right? So that is a social determinant of health. What is that? What kind of modifier? What does that mean? And there are a lot of rural people in Kentucky who live under the same conditions, right? And they may be white. So then we are missing that in them because we're focused just in people of color.